In LO3, we're going to be looking at lab equipment. In your notes, you'll be drawing pictures. They don't need to be fancy, so it's okay if you're artistically challenged, but they should help you remember what the equipment looks like because you're going to be quizzed on it later, and we're going to be using this stuff all year round, so you really need to know what you're using and what you're looking at. Here's the lovely batch of equipment that we're going to be looking at. Our first thing that we need to find is a beaker. Where is the beaker? Hopefully, you said this guy. The beaker is used to measure how much liquid we have, or volume. So we could fill this up we would use the counting up side and figure out how much of a liquid we have. So I could say measure out 200 milliliters of water for the experiment. You pour the water in up to about there. The problem with the beaker is that it's not very accurate. It's kind of hard to tell how to get, let's say, 240 milliliters. You could kind of estimate where it is, but it's not very specific. So to fix that problem, we use something a little more specific and a little bit more accurate called a graduated cylinder. Where do you see the graduated cylinder in the lab equipment? Hopefully, you said this one. Graduated cylinder is called graduated because it has all these markings on the side that are very specific. So if I wanted you to measure out 41 milliliters, you could very accurately do that by getting the water up to one above the 40. Now, something important about graduated cylinders is when you pour water in, it's kind of hard to tell in the video, but you get this thick band where the top of the water is, and it kind of dips down, and that's called a meniscus. So you always read the water level at the bottom of the meniscus. You get down to eye level, and then you decide where is the bottom of that dip. Here, I know it's very blurry in your video, it's actually at the bottom of the 65, so this would be 65 milliliters of water. This blue piece is not for measuring where the water level is at. It's simply there in case the graduated cylinder gets knocked over. It helps protect the glass, and that gets hit first instead of the top of the graduated cylinder. Next, we have a test tube. Where do you see a test tube? Hopefully you said right here. This also is for liquids, but we're not really measuring in this. Usually you'd measure in the graduated cylinder and pour it into a test tube. This is really convenient for holding over a flame, for heating up a liquid, or something like that. We're not really doing that in this class, but you'll see these more in chemistry. Next, we have a flask. We won't be using flasks in this class at all, but it's still good to know what they look like. And this guy is the flask. You can see it also has measurements like the beaker on it, so you should draw this very simply and add that to your notes. Next, we have a test tube brush, which is used for cleaning test tubes. That is this. So you can see that as you are cleaning things, this fits perfectly inside the test tube. You can use some soap, help scrape out anything that may be left behind in the test tube. Test tubes like to sit in test tube racks because if this was our experiment, we'd be spilling everything right now. So this back here conveniently holds multiple test tubes, and that is your test tube rack. Now we have two things that people confuse very easily. We have a pipette and an eyedropper. So you probably narrowed it down to these two. Here's the difference. A pipette is plastic. Might be a little bit difficult to see in the video here, but it is completely plastic. You just squeeze, suck up the liquid that you need, and dispense it elsewhere. Can't really tell too much, but maybe you can see that there are little projections on the side. That's because the pipette actually has measurements on it, so you could use it to measure out an exact amount of liquid. The eyedropper always has this cap. It may not necessarily be black. Sometimes they're brown or tan colored. But this is made out of glass, whereas the pipette is plastic, and there's no measurements on it. So pipette, eyedropper. Next we have forceps and tongs. Forceps is a fancy word for tweezers. So these would be forceps. We'll use them when we dissect things at the end of the year. And these are your tongs, which are very nice in shape, convenient for picking up beakers. This one's a little bit big, and I'm trying to do this with one hand while I hold my tablet to record in the other, so it's not working so well, but this would be your tongs. Next, so let's take a look at what we have again here. We have a Petri dish, and Petri dish is this guy. Comes in two pieces. There's a larger circle and a smaller circle. And I can close them. We will use this second semester to grow bacteria and swab the school and see where the dirtiest parts of the school are. So this is mainly for culturing organisms, like I said, bacteria. A stirring rod is this, made out of glass, so please be careful with them when we use them. It's to stir things, as the name implies. Next, we have triple beam balance. That would be this. And hopefully you've used it before. When you start, if you've had me, I know you've used it before, you always want to make sure that your balance is zeroed, or tared. Tare, T-A-R-E is another word for zero. If not, there is a knob here that you turn to try and get those lines to match up, and I just hit it so it's shifting a little bit. You will be using triple beam balances later on, so make sure that if you don't remember how to use them, you see me for help. Always start it back at the beginning. Weigh boat. I usually use these for weigh boats, and this would be for a liquid or some other object that can't go directly on the plate, where you could find the mass of the weigh boat, put your liquid in, find the mass of both together, do some subtraction, and figure out how much the liquid weighs. If you tried to put the liquid on here, it would just spill all over the place, so that wouldn't really work. So sometimes we will use weigh boats in order to measure the mass of a substance. And then finally, we have a meter stick, which should be pretty obvious right here. Meter stick, when we use these, please make sure you're always on the metric side, not on inches. And the meter stick is used to measure length. Remember that these are centimeters, 30, 31, 32, 33. The little ones are millimeters, and there are 10 millimeters in a centimeter, so this would be 10 millimeters, 20, 30, 40, etc. We'll be using this as well for a lab coming up, so if you aren't familiar with metric system or you don't really remember, please make sure that you ask. Next in your notes, it tells you exactly what you need to do. You need to see me for the lab equipment quiz, which you need to get 100% on. And if you don't get 100, you keep taking it until you do, and then you can move on to the next thing in your note packet.